Hello and welcome to Bird Barrier Live Studio. My name is Michael Gallion with Business Development here at in our SoCal studio, and today we are presenting bird control cleanup. It is a technical process to clean up bird droppings properly, and the thing is that there are some risk involved in bird control cleanup, and that's the most important part of today's session, is to just make sure that you are protected. If you're in the business of bird control, you're going to be exposed to an inordinate amount of bird droppings. I am as well. And, you know, when I travel, I've had to get special shots and things because of all the traveling that I do to protect my immune system. And of course, now we know how much the immune system plays into all this stuff. So we're going to jump into this. It's not a very long session because, you know, we're not going to a live remote, but at some point we're going to go and document a really involved cleanup. We've got a couple videos that we're going to show you today that show the instruction, but mostly it's about the steps, make sure you do everything right, and then the tools and different things that are involved, and make sure you understand mostly the risk and dangers that are associated with bird control cleanup. The first question that you should be able to answer is why bird control cleanup is so critical. Why is it critical? It's not just for the reasons you might think. Even if you work in bird control, you won't really understand the viewpoint from the customer. But bird control, when it comes down to it, it's really all that matters to the customer is the dropping portion. I mean, it's 95%. Is not the bird itself. People like birds. We talk about this in the intro to bird control. People in general don't want birds harmed. And if there was a way for birds to be around humans without leaving this incredible amount of dropping content on all the surfaces that we walk on and even higher, most people won't have a problem with the birds. It's not like a rat that they freak out when they see it. So we mentioned don't harm birds. As part of the business of bird control, we generally get birds to relocate. But the point of bird control is so much about the cleanup. So you never really should do a bird job without doing the cleanup. The issue is droppings, and the way to solve droppings ultimately is to relocate the birds. This is why professionals come in. They learn about bird control, and they learn how to get birds to relocate. If if all else fails, of course, you trap out the resident birds. That's acceptable for the species that are not protected, like pigeons, starlings, and sparrows that we cover in intro to bird control. The droppings themselves, one thing that a lot of people don't realize, and we talk about in intro to bird control, we're going to come back to it here, is that the resident birds imprint using pheromones within those droppings. And this is where we see a bird that returns to its nesting spot, and spikes have been put in the way in the futile effort to get rid of the nesting birds. So the spikes not being the proper deterrent, the birds will then imprint the spikes and begin building a nest right where it was. As a matter of fact, the spike then becomes rebar and support system for a much better nest in the future. So the very problem of the birds has gotten worse by not knowing and understanding some of the biology. High pressure bird problems are all about infestation, where they reach this point where the customer says, wow, this is a problem. I'm starting to see so many droppings, so many birds. What it is, the high pressure represents nesting most of the time. And this is where the professional has to get involved and offer solutions. A lot of times we don't really understand what are the motivating factors behind the customer, and we may, especially if you work in pest control, you make assumptions about disease and things like that. And certainly that's a critical part of bird control, and one of the main issues that will come up. But the number one issue with bird droppings is purely image. And we're going to show you this top 10 list so that you understand it from a customer viewpoint. Just remember, most of the time, If you're being called into a bird job, it's because the customer doesn't like the way it looks. They're unaware of the dangers. They don't like the way it looks, so they'll pay to have it cleaned up. That's the number two reason. Just the cost of cleanup is a big factor where they'll invest to have it cleaned up. Then work stoppages will happen primarily in food industry or where it can present dangers, but there will be damage to equipment. There will also be liability issues like slip and fall risk. And then finally, number 6 on the list, we get to disease risk. Now, we're seeing this move up. I would say right now, just from the amount of inquiries, it's probably moved up to, the number 3 spot at this point, just because of the added element of immune system problems that come from bird droppings. People, now that they're going into this intensive cleanup or restaurants are starting to reopen, they're really looking at the cleanliness and they're starting to discover the droppings and investigate this further. So we're going to talk about that part of the cleanup today. Then you get into inventory damage, secondary infestations like bird mites that are parasitic hosts on the bird, then they cast off into the nesting and fall below. Customer may not notice the birds being a problem, but the mites might be a problem, right? Then the customers of theirs, like at a grocery store, they see birds getting around the food, they might complain. And then clogged drains, especially in the Southwest and dry areas like Southern California where it doesn't rain for a while, and all of a sudden everything gets clogged up. That could be a problem. I'm going to show you a few images here just to show you the point where customers say, all right, this is enough. We can't even function here, and what the kind of damage is. Property damage, of course, the droppings getting on equipment is a problem, but look at this picture. You'll notice insulation material. This is a classic sign of starling damage where they get into attic spaces and they just tear things up there. And you go up there and there's a trash bag full of hay and sticks and weeds up in the attic, teeming with parasitic and the little bugs and things. It could be a real problem. The disease vectors are twice that of a rodent. For wildlife people, they talk about how dangerous rats can be. And of course, we know the last major big black plague in history was related to rats and the, carrying disease. But there are twice the factors with birds. And as a matter of fact, this current pandemic that we're going through was related to another flying creature of bats. They're pretty sure it's bat related. The DNA of the COVID is related to bats, but they expected it to be avian borne. The scientists a few years back predicted that the diseases that would come from birds for pandemics would be related to birds. It'd be more likely that they would be carriers. So all of this is coming to the forefront. So we're making a little more emphasis about these things and the diseases that can be carried. Another thing that is very important, and remember this, if you've never done bird control cleanup, the dry droppings are far more dangerous to you. Now, before I go any further, I want to have somebody type in real quick, if you can. Why are dry droppings more dangerous than wet droppings? Wet droppings can actually fall right on a customer, like in a big warehouse or somebody that works at that place. The wet droppings they'll wipe them off immediately. But, right, airborne dust is correct. I'm sorry, I can't see. Oh, Annie, very good. Annie is one of our great techs out there. She's doing very well, and we appreciate all the feedback. She gave us a good testimonial on a Bird Barrier Live training. There's a place there for you to give us feedback and testimonials, and I appreciate your testimonial, Annie. Yeah, this stuff becomes airborne, and when you breathe it into your lungs, man, this stuff takes off. It can really be a problem, and it can actually be fatal in some cases. The most common way to get contamination is inhaling. The next common is contaminated food or drink, usually through the hands. You notice during this pandemic, all the emphasis is really, we're wearing masks, but it's more about touching your face with your hands after it's contaminated. The same thing applies here for bird droppings. So direct contact, and especially don't touch dead birds. They are usually very infested with all kinds of problems and bacteria and things. So keep that in mind as well. When you go out there to document bird jobs, remember, you're going to encounter droppings like this site that we see here on this slide. But just make sure you document everything before you start your cleanup. The documentation of the droppings is our best clue as to what is going on, the pressure level, and then as you'll see coming up, we have dropping patterns that can actually tell us a lot about what to do in order to solve the problem. So before you leave that site and you assess the cleanup situation, you want to get pictures of photos close up of those droppings, where the worst spots are. We talk about this in Intro to Bird Control, and even in the sales class. Nest and high pressure are very critical. Get pictures of all this stuff. Take your measurements of the area. Also, inspect the roof. Don't leave the roof out. Don't leave the roof out of the cleanup, because airborne particles on the roof that get sucked into the HVAC are a problem, and you need to express the risk to your customer about that area. But most importantly, the reason we have you inspect the roof is to rule out nesting up there, because we got to address every spot of nesting. If you don't make that inspection on the roof, you're going to probably have a partially solved bird job. A lot of times birds are nesting. And then whenever you can give us the Google address, those are the things we need for you to document the job before you move on to the step of actually cleaning up. So let's talk about the actual process of cleaning up now. Personal protective equipment, PPE, everybody's PPE now. Before the pandemic, the average person wouldn't know PPE, but look at how every day it's in the news, the supplies. Now, bird barrier, for this time, we are offering the N95 mask for the professionals. We've got a lot of supplies that are available now. We've got all kinds of things that are available for sale. The full Tyvek suits. We have the nitrile gloves. All of this PPE, we sell it now. Make sure if you don't have these supplies, let us know. We offer these. As a matter of fact, I'm going to mention one other thing here is I don't have the information built into this PowerPoint, but these devices that you can use to atomize the cleaning solutions and sterilize for COVID, we have the machines that are going to be available coming up that we're selling now too. Those are in short supply. The pest control industry needs those. A lot of the big companies are shifting gears into that type of cleanup, and we'll be talking about that on a separate little webcast or in some of our social media coming up. But HEPA or higher is what's required for protection from bird debris. Also, here's another area that people overlook on a regular basis. Sealed eye protection is very critical. We don't just wear, from splash, the vapors, the dust getting in your eyes. It's a straight route to the bloodstream, and people get eye infections. That's common. One time at a work site, sure enough, I just, I was sweating like crazy, and I lifted the goggles off, and I had a lot of debris on my forehead, and all that sweat ran down. And later that day, I had bad eye infection. Luckily, straight to the doctor and got it taken care of. But this stuff is dangerous, okay? Sealed eye protection. Here's a quick question. Why can I not do cleanup? As you see me on this camera today, who can tell me, in the current condition that I'm in, just looking at me as I stand here now, assuming I put on all the proper PPE, why am I still not safe to do bird control cleanup? Think about that. I'm going to continue on here, but if somebody can type it in, there it is. All right, beard is correct. So I'm not going to get a good seal where I need to here. And putting a face mask on is not good enough. So I need a full, system that encloses my entire head, or I need to shave my beard to get a good seal. So don't forget that. You want to get a good tight seal when you're doing the cleanup. What's that? Yeah, I'm not going to shave my beard, because then I'll have to do this freaking cleanup. So one reason why I can't do cleanup is I don't want to do cleanup unless I absolutely have to. This doesn't mean I don't go to sites all the time. Believe me, I go to sites, but I'm very careful and precautious. But I don't get into the real gross stuff unless I have to. And in that case, I wear the proper PPE that we're talking about here. So I mentioned it earlier, nitrile gloves. We have these for sale as well. Let's take a look at what those look like, Zach, on the slide here. Um, you know, of course, heavy duty gloves are better, but and then they're not going to get beat up. But one of the most important things about these gloves is you throw them away. And if you're doing this kind of cleanup work, you got to think clearly about bringing that contamination into your vehicle and how dirty and contaminated things can get. So we have a full Tyvek suit as well. We're selling these. You can get these usually at a lot of different places, but let me tell you, a lot of the big places, even Home Depot, is out of stock on a lot of this stuff. Rubber boots, work boots are okay, but remember, good grip, non-skid. And you'll see on this particular this picture of the boots, you'll notice there is a cleaning tray. Now, I will rinse carefully the bottom of my shoes after a bird control cleanup, and I'll sanitize. But this is a good idea as well to get all that, rinse all that stuff off, use bleach, diluted bleach. That's one thing that we'll talk about coming up, to kill everything before you go back into your vehicle. That's all part of your standard certification for safety otherwise, but I'm making sure that everybody understands all of that. Now, separate of PPE, there are tools, and there are also some safety factors still at play, but common tools that you'll need are scrubbers, wire brushes. Investing if you're doing a lot of cleanup and investing in power tools, they pay for themselves. I'll tell you that right now. If you're doing, a job every week or so, bird related, these tools allow you to get done faster with your cleanup, get it done more efficiently, and move on to other jobs. Especially you guys that are independent and maybe you run a solo outfit, or you only have one or two people. Even more critical that you consider investing in power tools. Scrapers, not just the hand ones, but these ones that mount on poles, those are very good. Shovels, you'll need a good scraping shovel as well. And then for loose droppings, these big scoop shovels are very good. And make sure that they're like a poly material, not metal. The bird droppings are going to corrode and rust all of this stuff. So on the scoop one, you can get away with using that. A lot of paper and cloth shop towels. These kind of towels, you're going to need them. Especially if you're cleaning up, and on the same day you're going to be installing, which is very common. You're going to be doing the bird abatement. You're going to be installing deterrents. Make sure you have plenty of those. Heavy duty trash bags, but as our owner, the president of our company, Cameron Riddell, he was reviewing our materials. He said, make sure you tell them medium at the largest, maybe even small, because when you start scooping the heavy, wet dropping material, those things will break under their own weight. So rarely can you get more than 30 or 40 pounds in one of these without them breaking. So you're going to go through a lot more of these bags. But the bags are important because we double bag all the loose material. We'll talk about that coming up more. Fall protection, of course. If you're going up high on lifts, you got to have your standard fall protection. So don't overlook this. Even if you're just going up on ladders, cleanup is slippery work, and there are risks, and you may want to clip and tie yourself off. Excuse me. Tie yourself off up high to make sure you're not slipping and falling down. Pressure washers, generally there are two categories. Is whether they have self-contained sources, like the one on the left there is a complete self-contained generator to produce its own power using gas, and then it has its own water tank. These are big investments, but they can really pay for themselves. Otherwise, you've got your like Home Depot version, or you buy a version that plugs in and it needs to have a hose connected to it. These are still good way to go as long as you've got those kind of access. And that's one important thing. When you're doing your inspection, don't forget about checking to make sure there are some good outlets nearby and that you have water and power available. You get to your site to clean up and you haven't planned ahead, you can really regret that. We don't want to lose any time fumbling around when it's time to do this work. Another important part of this that Cameron wanted me to mention and include is the GFCI, or ground fault circuit interrupter. You guys don't want to get yourself in trouble and get shocked or electrocuted on a work site. And this is a very serious part of the job, and wanted me to make sure I mention that. So make sure that you're plugging your equipment in. Anything electrical that you're using, whether it's a scrubber or whatnot, it goes into a circuit that will break and reset if you get it into trouble or it shorts out. Standing in water and things like that is very common with a cleanup. Let's look at some dropping examples. We're gonna take some questions coming up. I'm going to keep this moving along. Again, type in your questions as we go here, and I'll answer them. If I'm going too fast, let me know. But let's look at the fine art of bird droppings here. You'll hear me mention loose and bonded. And what the reason why, sometimes we got to know what the level of droppings is. Sometimes the actual droppings become like a cement and they bond everything together. Pigeons will use these droppings to hold their nest together. They actually live in their own filth, their own excrement. And I know this is a pretty gross subject, but there are tons of loose droppings that don't necessarily bond and glue to the surface as well. Birds don't defecate and urinate separately. It's all just one mixture that comes out and on a regular basis. And so you will see, you got to kind of consider how well bonded these droppings are to understand how to clean them up. But we'll talk about the process coming up here. But these are a combination of loose and bonded. This is very standard. Different species of birds, you'll notice different colors and patterns and things. That's a big part of us figuring out what the birds are. If you don't get pictures of the birds, we can actually see from the droppings what we're dealing with. And then these droppings, of course, tell us more information about how to help you solve the problem. So you got a good idea here of all these messy bird droppings. The thing about droppings, when you're doing your inspection, is you'll see patterns. So if we look at the red box, for example, that is where the birds were nesting. Now, from the ground, I was able to tell that, and I could see that the pipe with the red line across, and then this pillar that is denoted with the yellow outline there. If I look at the ground beneath, we can see the exact position. Now, the box, the droppings aren't going to fall directly from the box. The birds stand on the edge of the box. The pattern is going to be in front of the box. But seeing that level of droppings without looking up, I look down when I go to the inspections, and then I see the nest spot right away. And then I recognize that there are other droppings surrounding that nesting spot, and we talk about that in Intro to Bird Work. Those are staging areas. And knowing that those patterns tells me where I need to do the treating, right? So those are what we call pressure patterns. And the pressure patterns tell us clues. So you don't want to just clean things off without taking this into consideration. If you're a professional, you want to use this forensic approach. Here is what the pressure pattern looks like for a common item in a parking garage. So let me have you guys guess at that. What do you think is the situation above these droppings? What is that structure? Who can guess of where these birds are? I can tell you they were pigeons and they were nesting, but they're nesting in a common structure that you'll find in a parking garage. Any guesses out there? I'm going to wait about 10 more seconds, just in case. You know, a lot of people might guess, standard sprinkler pipes, and of course pipes are involved up there. But what this is your duct for the ducting. Actually, lighting is a good guess. because lighting, they will sometimes the long fluorescent tubes will be long, and the droppings will fall on either side. But this is that galvanized ductwork that you'll see overhead in parking garages. The air ventilation systems, a lot of time it just circulates air through. It's not necessarily hot or cold air. But if it's heated in a parking garage, man, that becomes a very heavy infest. And that's what this was. The heat caused the birds to want to be up on it. That natural heat through the winter, man, that becomes a great sight. Here we can see a pressure pattern where the pillar at the bottom, we see the pillar, but up above, that's supporting a big I-beam, a huge wide I-beam. And so on either side of the I-beam, the droppings are falling from that. Here's another I-beam pattern. And these patterns really are important because they're going to lead you to the nesting areas. Now, here's what happens when you have a tree and it gets infested over a patio area. And that just becomes a real nightmare to try to solve. We have a question out there? Okay, I thought I heard something there. Jack was vomiting. Okay. He's not used to this stuff. Like, we have to go out into the world of this. This is, in the bird world, we call this white gold, Zach. White gold. This is where the money is. How about this HVAC system? Now, the customer may say, hey, I want this all cleaned up, and they won't even know that, this is getting in through the filters and into the building below. So it becomes part of your conversation to help sell the job, just in case. And it's the only place where I will say that you bring up health issue when the customer doesn't bring it up, just to make sure they're aware of that risk, especially if they're considering not moving forward with, at very least, the cleanup. And on something like this, to solve it, you're not going to have to do a whole lot of work. All you're going to do is exclude the gap at the bottom that the birds are getting under there. Here's, these are corvids, like crows, that get up above, and they come into a structure, and sometimes this is a sign of a secondary infestation. The crows are actually infesting because they're living off of the pigeon population. And this can be quite advanced. The nesting itself is often loose and bonded together. And when we talk about the bonded part of this, it means that the bonded part is where you're going to treat with the pre-treatment. The loose material gets taken away first before you actually do the treatment of dissolve it. And we'll talk about the cleaning solutions. One cleaning solution I want to mention, especially if you're going to be installing optical gel. You cannot leave old bird gel. Now, we don't sell this type of bird gel. At one time in our long history, we did include these type of gels, but we knew this wasn't a really good solution, and it led us to eventually develop the product optical gel and Optica in Canada. But the gel becomes infested with the bird pheromones. You can't just clean over this, leave the gel, and expect it to work. So we sell this oil flow cleaning solution, and that will dissolve all of that gel. It's a lot more work, but you have to use this in order to clean that up. So just keep that in mind. If you ever run into gel like that, and it's old, crystallized, it turns black, you can see the pattern there and then eventually it fails. Of course, the birds come back, and there you are trying to solve it. Another thing about patterns and dropping patterns after you clean up, droppings will tell us failures also after we do treatment. So in this example of a test area that was done in Canada for Optica, we specifically put droppings in patterns to show the customer that if we didn't treat the whole area, there would be droppings that would fall below. And the marked area, you see this black type, this black line, it's actually a square that we mark off below to show the resulting droppings and where they're falling in a test area. When you do your test pictures, for us to review, make sure they're clear. This was the quality of the photo, and it was enough that I could kind of get the idea, but make sure you take good, clear pictures. Now, here's the example I'm talking about. Now, in selling a big bird project, sometimes you go and you do a little test area. Now, the little gray box against the wall is where birds were nesting, and all the pipes around it were where the birds were staging. So we saw pressure patterns below and figured out what we needed to treat. And so everything was cleaned above and below. The square area was the section of testing. We used zip ties to mount the optical gel and then glue on top of the box. This is what it looked like below before we did the treatment. And then here's the after. This is not only after, but what I like about the photo that I used is that this is now 3 months after the treatment. And you see in that square, there's no sign of droppings within that square. When a customer sees the droppings go away from a test area, they are convinced that whatever the big overall solution is working. It's all about the droppings. Remember, it's not about the birds. So to know whether or not birds are gone, the customer doesn't look up in the air for birds. They look at the ground for droppings. So this is why we do these type of test areas. And then here's Major League bird cleanup right here for you. Okay, yeah, so we'll take some questions now. We're gonna take some questions. The question there is, does optical gel leave residue in structures? The answer is no, because the disc itself gets glued down, and the whole point of it is to remove that disc eventually years in the future. So no, optical gel is not going to leave residue. The only thing that will leave residue is the adhesive you use to glue down deterrents. And you certainly should take our optical gel class if you haven't. That is a great tool. If you're getting involved in bird control cleanup, you'll want to also do the optical gel training. Let's do a quick poll. And these are some of the questions that will appear on the exam after you take this. But the most dangerous bird droppings you will encounter in bird control, is it fresh, wet droppings on the skin? Is it dry droppings that become airborne? Is it cold droppings from the dreaded COVID penguin? Or is it just huge piles of bird droppings? You know, and everybody out there gets the point. Yeah, it's dry droppings. Now, huge piles aren't dangerous if you don't interfere with them. It's a lot like asbestos, right? How about this? Before contacting bird droppings, what's a good idea to do this one thing first? Is it wear proper PPE? Is it to confirm where you're going to plan to dispose of your material? Is it to wet down the dry droppings so that dusty residue is not a problem? Of course, yeah. I mean, it does make sense to wet them down, but all of those, you should be doing all of these things. You don't want to just go in and clean up a site and not think about where you're going to go with your droppings. And we'll talk a little bit about disposal of droppings coming up here. All right, very good. Any questions? Any more questions right now about what we've covered so far? Again, if you want to unmute yourself and talk to me right now, we really encourage that. We have the ability to answer those in real time. Otherwise, type in any questions. Does this all make sense? All right, I don't see any other questions coming in, and of course, we'll be glad to. At the end of this, we're going to keep an open forum of Q&A. But let's move on about the actual cleanup. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts of cleanup and talk about the individual steps. So as we mentioned, the first thing you want to do is spray with water if possible. Now, if you've got a lot of loose droppings, you're wearing all your proper PPE, you have to weigh out how much water. I always, I like the pump sprayer. The pump sprayer, and you just put a light coating over the top of it. But if we start power washing immediately as your way of wetting down, you're going to create a spread of all this flowing of bird dropping material, and it becomes heavier. A light misting over it without it getting too heavy keeps the dust down, and then you start scooping up all of the heavy debris, all right? So remove anything loose, which includes nesting, failed bird spikes, screen material that's all contaminated with bird droppings. Anything that you saw the previous attempt at bird control put up there that's not part of the original architecture should be removed if it's contaminated. And if it's loose, remove all this stuff. After all the loose stuff is out of the way, then you want to spray a specific cleaner When I say specific, that means it's something designed for bird droppings only. And we'll talk about those in just a second. Let it soak. Let that dropping cleaner that we talked about soak in, usually about 20 minutes. Let that do the work. There's plenty of other things to do while you're, in the middle of cleanup. There's plenty of tasks. You could be prepping some of your deterrents. You could be doing other things. Let it soak in. Don't just go right at it. It's always better to let that really soak in, especially if that bonded dropping material is on a very porous surface like concrete, stucco, those surfaces. We let it soak in. Then you're going to scrape and rinse. You're going to scrape things off. When I say scrape, of course, if it's stucco, you're going to damage the surface. You got to use proper finesse, plastic scrubbers. You can't without damaging the surface. And then after we rinse everything down with water and we got all that residue away, we give it a light coat of diluted bleach water, and that sanitizes everything, making it safe for you to be around it, put your hands on it if you remove your gloves, that sort of thing. And of course, much more easy to install the actual deterrents at this point without having your gloves, using adhesives. Let's take a look at the bottles that I have up here. I just want to give it a quick talk about the cleaning solutions. Now, in all these classes so far, you guys hear me preach the gospel according to Dissolve It. And there's only one reason, is that because it works so well. Look, this is all about labor savings. If I've got something that's going to speed up and work more effectively and reduce the amount of callbacks, Dissolve It is the one you want to use. It's a digest, breaks down the droppings. It's got an enzyme in it that specifically attacks the pheromones, the things that draw birds back. And another thing is, people like the smell of this product. They are not opposed to the residual smell that's left behind. Now, I have people say, no, I like Dirty Bird. I use Dirty Bird. Dirty Bird is available. We've got a couple other cleaning solutions. The one I mentioned earlier for the gel, right? So these are the main cleaners. But I really emphasize, focus on this one. Dissolve It is your friend if you're a professional and you're doing bird control work, especially if what follows is bird control work. And if you're just doing a cleanup, you're just going to keep repeating the process without actually solving the bird problem. Sometimes that happens, and certainly you can use whatever you want in that situation because the birds are just going to keep coming back anyway. Until you mitigate the problem, you want to really use Dissolve It. It speeds it up in terms of the labor because it does such a good job of dissolving the droppings and making them easy to get rid of completely, getting rid of the pheromone. Let's take a look at this starter kit video for optical gel. This is the cleanup portion of that video to show you the steps. Now, before we start the video, I'll mention one more thing, is that the kit, or the starter kit for optical gel, for example, it comes with Dissolve It, it comes with bleach, all contained. Let's go ahead and watch the video. So here's your site. This is where spikes were failing. When you get the kit, one of the things is mentioned is make sure you pre-treat properly. Get some nitro gloves. And again, anything that was there from the previous person trying to solve the problem needs to be removed. You got to get rid of all that material. And if you have to replace the screening, do it with new, fresh material. Don't leave bird residue. It's got to be completely clean. So the starter kit has a half full bottle of Dissolve It because the proper ratio is 1:1. And the gallon that I have here, therefore, will make 2 gallons. We're soaking everything down. Not only do we soak anything that has bird droppings on the structure we're treating, we treat below on anything where the droppings have fallen. Let it soak for 20 minutes, like I said. And then fill that up with just regular water. Now, of course, power wash, if you have it, power wash at this step. You're going to rinse and get rid of everything. You don't want to damage any surfaces, but you want to speed up this process. In the starter kit, you just use that spray bottle. They put in new screen. Now it's ready, right? It's ready for the final sanitation step. We've gotten rid of every last residue. By the way, you don't want to ever put bleach right on top of bird droppings. It produces a dangerous gas. So make sure that you've gotten rid of all the bird droppings before you use bleach in any way. It's very critical. So now we just lightly spray diluted bleach. Cameron was asking, does it really help the glue? My experience and other installers, once you have that dry surface of bleach, it really holds very well. So that's it for the starter kit. That gives you a taste of what is going on with the actual cleanup of a bird job. So any questions about that? You know, has anyone out there actually used a starter kit and done that cleaning solution? We do have a question there. Does Dissolve It kill germs as well? Great, great question. It is not a sanitizer. Sanitizing is a separate step. I think, Annie, we had a job where this came up where we talked about using sanitizer. If you use sanitizer alone, but it's not specifically for bird pheromones, then that sanitizer is not going to work either. So it's always a combination. That's why we bring bleach into it. And the other thing is, there is something about the combination of Dissolve It and the bleach residue together that kills the germs, sanitizes, and gets rid of the pheromones. Don't introduce other cleaners into the mix if you're using optical gel. It upsets the kind of chemical balance and strength of the product. Just with the Dissolve It and bleach, that's all you want to use for optical gel or Optica in Canada. As far as other deterrents, whatever you want to use, that's fine. And of course, if you're excluding netting and doing things like that, the cleanup is less critical because you're physically keeping them from actually getting in and reclaiming their nesting spot. But any other questions about that, let me know. Here's another little note on health that I want you to think about. Take a look at this slide. If you've got any immune system problems, you've got a cold, a flu, a fever, you always have, the tendency to get pneumonia, don't do this type of cleanup. It's very dangerous to mix it in with a weak immune system. Bird droppings are considered hazardous infectious waste. That's what they are categorized. If you go to a dump to get rid of them, they'll want to know that they're bird droppings, and that's how they categorize. You double bag. So not only do you put it in the trash bag, you take that trash bag, which is tied up, you put it inside another bag, and you tie that. And then you can put it into a dumpster following whatever guidelines are required for local rules. Like in California, you are allowed to put it in dumpsters. You can't overload a full dumpster full of this stuff for your trash company. So you want to make sure you know about your local laws. Another thing that's crazy that I see happen, and believe me, I get hungry and tired after working, and 4 or 5 hours into a cleanup, you're about starved to death. And the only thing you really should have is water during that cleanup time. And I tell you this in all seriousness, your cleanup, after you're done, you want to not eat until you shower, if at all possible. And when your clothes, you're going to take off your clothes when you get home. Those should all be washed separately of your regular load of laundry. That's another important thing that you should do. But don't plan on eating snacks. Even if you're going to remove your gloves and everything, that's just a bad idea. Mixing this with eating or, drinking, open containers. You can have a water bottle, and again, where you put your hand on that water bottle really matters. So don't just reach right. You're going to reach up with your contaminated hand and unscrew that lid. That's a big mistake. Don't do stuff like that. Have that water somewhere with the lid off, or with a straw is generally safe to drink out of a straw and put it back. Think about things like this. This is what this is about. I'm trying to protect everybody. This little slide is a cool, handy thing to keep in your library of things to show customers. I mean, it talks about these very highly regarded organizations, now regarded more than ever. They're in the news all the time about the dangers of exposure to bird droppings and the effect on the immune system. So keep this in mind, especially for older people. If you have a customer that's above the age of 60 and infants under the age of 2 are at higher risk. So even for elderly people that still work in the industry, you might want to really reconsider doing a lot of cleanup work like this and let some of the other techs be involved in the cleanup. You know, it's something you don't want to overlook. The last video we're going to show you is an actual job site that I went on for instructional purposes. Again, I wish we had, it would be fun for me to get in a full hazmat and go into that bathroom that I showed you earlier, which was the real show. We certainly want to show you how to do the really heavy duty stuff when you get to it. But if you have any questions, you get a job like that, let us know and we'll help guide you through it. But there's not a whole lot of science to that. You're going to be doing a lot of shoveling and putting in bags, but just make sure now you're doing it with all the proper PPE. One other thing I should mention is the idea of vacuuming. Now, a HEPA vacuum, yeah, you could use it. My opinion, only in certain areas where you can't really get into. You don't have good access, but using a vacuum or a wet dry vac to pull up all these bird droppings. Remember, all that, you're kicking up so much dust and debris into the air. It can be quite dangerous for the people working there, the people who that's their job site. You want to be very careful with using vacuum cleaners. I recommend not to do that. It's most efficient to use shovels and bag things up like we talked about. But let's take a look at this video from a work site. I actually narrate as we go on that one. So let's So what we're doing is we're pouring a full gallon of the actual dissolve it. We've already poured it out into the bucket here. We're going to add an equal amount of water because it's a 1-to-1 ratio is what we need. Once that is mixed together, we're ready to go. We're ready to apply this and start doing the pre-treatment. All of this contains pheromones that helps draw the birds back, and getting rid of all of this along with the pheromone imprint is really critical. Okay.
So it's all muddy water.
All right, so now I'm just going to as much of the surface as possible here. Okay, this is all coated thoroughly. We'll let this soak for 20 minutes. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead and scrub off the droppings. And you can see here, they're coming right off. The solvent works very well. Okay, looks pretty good. Okay, so after we've scrubbed this down, we got a lot of residue here. We want to rinse this off. This is just regular water. You can spray water down, but the best way here is to get nice and wet and then just wipe this down. You see how clean everything comes after we've done this dissolvement treatment. Now sometimes you will have oxidation, staining, some residual spots, but as long as you've gotten the main dropping off the surface, you're going to be good to go as far as the pheromones. Alright, so once the surface is clean and rinsed, one little in-between step that we want to do is put a light mixture of diluted bleach water. This sanitizes the surface for me as an installer. It also is really good prep for the actual install. Makes the surface, especially if you're gluing down disc, it makes it much more receptive to glue.
and it's also a mild deterrent for the bird as well.
Okay, there we go. So that's it. We covered all the bullet points, the main steps of cleanup. Annie made a comment. For her, it's important to re-wet droppings during cleanup in hot weather. They dry out too fast, and that's something you have to consider. She's up in the desert areas, and so in situations like that, yeah, of course you want to keep re-wetting them, keep them damp. Try to do it in sections. One thing that happens when you wet bird droppings, there's an effect called the capillaric effect. It's how paper towels work. But either way, the problem is if they start to dry out halfway through, they kind of lose their ability to reabsorb as well. So if you're in a really big cleanup, I recommend that you would do it in sections, like completely clean one section, that you can do if possible, and then move to the next section, and then come through behind it all and do a big power wash. I know you got to work with whatever situation you're dealing with. Up in the Pacific Northwest, it's wet all the time. Nothing ever dries out up there, so it can be even worse. Like breathing in, and the smell can be terrible in some of these parking garages that I've been in. But that covers all the steps. I can't think of anything more that I can tell you in terms of safety that I can add to this. But again, the most important part of a bird control job, really from a customer viewpoint is about cleaning up and getting rid of the droppings. But of course, the goal is then permanently have the birds gone so that the droppings stop falling. We have time. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left in case there are any other questions. If there aren't any questions, chat in there. Tell us, how we can improve the classes. Of course, you're going to be getting an exam. Just make sure you absorb the information, and then during that exam, there is a place for you to put in feedback there as well, and we look for that kind of feedback. If you let's see here, can I make a suggestion? Of course. You can make a suggestion right here if you want. Let us know, how can we improve the class? And then, of course, put that into the other feedback that you get as well. But make any suggestion you want. I mean, we're all ears. This class is about you guys out there, and you're our customer. We want to make sure that. Yeah, go ahead, unmute her. Okay.
Hi, Michael. There's something that I found really helps in the cleanup process when you're, especially working on roofs. What we're doing is using landscape fabric. We roll it out below the roof line because we're going to be spraying off a lot of droppings, etc. And what that does is it allows the droppings to remain on the cloth, but it allows the water to run through. And then when we're done with that, we can just roll that up and get all of that in sections, of course, according to weight, into double bag trash bags. It saves a ton of time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I've done that before with burlap and that type of fabric on solar panel cleanouts. So that's a great suggestion. I need to include it in, and I'll add it in to the future webcasts we do on this. If you have any photos that you can put up of that shows that step, I would be greatly appreciative if you can post it in our live training.
I'll text.
I mentioned bird barrier live training earlier. Okay, everybody out there that's watched today, go to Bird Barrier Live Training. It's a private group on Facebook and just ask to join the group, and we'll let you in there. And it's a great place for us that are doing this type of work to share these kind of ideas, suggestions. It's a forum that's there to help put all the collective wisdom together for the betterment for all of us. So thanks a lot, Annie, for all your feedback. And it's great having customers like you out there that are doing such a great job. And I know one of my favorite posts came from you. It was on one of the wildlife sites or something, but you made a grand announcement that you landed the biggest job you ever bid on in bird work. And that's what this is all about. We want to see people out there succeed in the business of bird control. So share your success stories. Give us feedback. Tell us how we can improve the classes, the podcast. The next one coming up is this Thursday, I believe at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and it will be the ledge products, specifically about how we install those type of products. So if you haven't seen that one, be sure to sign up on Eventbrite like we do for all of these. So I think that's it for now. I will be glad to answer any questions that you put into Bird Barrier Live Training and under the post or in the survey that you're going to get. My name is Michael Gallion, and I do business development. One other slide I'm going to share with you as we go is all the other contacts out there for our company. Of course, I'm the West Coast, and I'm based in Southern California, and I'm able to go to sites in the Southern California area, and I use a lot of those for field tests. But Ray is based in Baltimore, so he's our East Coast, and so he goes from, covers the whole Eastern area. I cover the West. Tony Jaton is, he mans most of the incoming projects to estimate, and he's through our 800 number, you can reach him. And again, our president of our company is Cameron Riddell. We've been doing this for the webcast series now for, going almost a year now, I guess, since we've been doing this, and the current format seems to be working out really well. So you know how to get a hold of us. We thank you for your time, and we'll see you at the next webcast. Take care. Stay safe out there.